This is hands down the only time in my life my gut reacted this strongly to a stranger, so I thought it was worth it to share. One extremely rare no-work, no-class day when I was 19 years old, I decided to go thrifting. I drove a few towns over to a store in a rural area where I'd always had decent luck before. I decided to do a gallery wall in my bedroom and needed some cheap frames. I'm on the phone with my mom as I meander through the store. As I approach the aisle with the frames, I notice a 30 to 40-ish-year-old man standing there all alone. He was not in an aisle or looking at anything really. Rather, he was staring at me with a large, almost comical grin on his face. In the back of my mind, I recalled how long I'd been in the store so far, about 5 to 10 minutes in total. I wondered if he'd been staring at me the entire time, and somehow I'd just never noticed. The prospect of that made me feel real weird, not wanting to take any chances, and believing back then I could dispel any potential weirdness with direct confrontation. I looked him in the eyes and said, "How's it going, bud? Need something?" in a tone that I hoped implied I'm not interested in any sort of weird bullshit today. He didn't say anything though, almost like what I'd said didn't even register with him. He just kept staring as I walked past, with a huge bizarre grin on his face. Alright, yeah, whatever, weirdo. I rounded up an armful of frames and began laying them out on the floor. It's early afternoon on a weekday, and there were very few people in the store I would be inconveniencing by doing this. Sitting on the floor, looking through all the different frames and still on the phone with my mom, I noticed a shadow hovering over my work. It dawned on me that the man not only hadn't moved on to keep shopping, he was now silently standing over me. My mom picked this moment to want to hang up on me, of course. I tried to stall her, but she was at work, so I had to let her go. I refused to be deterred from my mission, though, so I glanced over at the man and kept arranging. At this point, though, the warning bells were reaching atomic levels in my brain. I was starting to get a bit jittery. I had never had this reaction before to a stranger just acting strange, so something was definitely wrong here, even if I hadn't noticed what quite yet. Grinning and staring, he finally says, "You're pretty." Thanks, I reply. "Where do you go to school?" I was so weirded out at this point that I actually blurted out the truth. There are 14,000 students at my university anyway, I thought to myself. He has no idea who I am. He'll never find me if worse came to worse. He didn't say another word and continued to stare, still grinning. At this point, I couldn't even focus anymore. I gathered up whatever I had on the floor and stood up to leave, pretending to answer my phone. 19-year-old me, who wouldn't have dreamed of abandoning a conversation without a polite exit, even with a weirdo, straight up turned and left this guy there. I made my way to the checkout and prayed he wouldn't follow me and wait in line. He didn't, surprisingly. He actually left. Oh, thank God, I thought. Why are some people so oblivious to social awkwardness? More so, why was I so freaked out by this dude in particular? It's not like he's the first person who ever tried to get a bit creepy with me. I stood in the long line inspecting my purchases. I was a little bit impressed that despite my distress, the haphazard grab I made yielded some real good finds. It's important to note at this point that there's a main entrance at the front of the building and a side door equidistant to the corner as the front door. The parking area is an L shape surrounding the exits. My car was parked smack dab on the corner right in between the two of them. From any point in the store, you cannot see my car. I let my gaze drift over to the side exit, where I see a man walking through the parking lot. There he goes, the fucking weirdo. As he walks, he's staring at me through the door. A minute later, I saw him pass by the front entrance. That was a bit weird. There was no exit to the road from that direction. You couldn't even get to the sidewalk from there. Maybe his car was parked over that way. He was still staring at me. Another minute passed by and he reversed course to meander past the front entrance again, then past the side entrance over and over, the whole time still making eye contact with me as I'm waiting inside the store. It dawned on me in that moment that he was covering the exits and my car. But how did he know that was my car? Well, because I told him which school I went to, and I had my bright yellow school parking pass hanging on the dashboard, plain as day. Being a cocky 19-year-old means you don't often realize you should be worried about some things, and yet I was petrified when I realized this. I did something I'd never done until then, and haven't had to do since. Red-faced and flustered, I told the cashier because I didn't know what to do. She immediately offered to grab a male employee to walk me to my car, and before me appeared a high school friend who I'd forgotten even worked there. He grabbed my bags and walked me over to my vehicle, where the man was standing right next to my driver's side door. My friend loaded my things into the back seat, actually having to move this guy out of the way. We made a few words of small talk while the guy stood awkwardly in our conversation, clearly trying to appear casual and unsure how to proceed with whatever he had been trying to do initially. My friend closed my door behind me and gave the man a pointed look. He started to wander away, and I sped away toward the road. In my rearview mirror, I could see the man walking out of the parking lot toward the road. He hadn't even arrived in a car or with anyone. He wasn't waiting for anyone except for me. When I left, his business was finished, or perhaps even thwarted. I couldn't stop wondering if his plan had just continued. Would he have taken me by force? I also later had a light bulb moment. He asked me which school I went to, not which college. I looked much younger back then than I do now. People used to ask me what high school I went to well into my mid-20s. Well, looking back, I'm positive he said school because he meant high school. So yeah, fuck that guy. During university, I had a slew of creepy encounters. This one has stuck with me the most, though. It all started during my first class. One day, a group of us were walking together along campus, and slowly the members began to branch off individually. It ended up being just myself, and a guy who I was not very inclined to befriend. I only knew his name, really. I didn't want to be rude though and not keep walking along with him just because I wasn't really his buddy. He asked me where I was going and I told him I normally take a nap in between classes and I was going back to my dorms. He asked me if he could see my suite. Normally this would be a no-brainer red flag, but my particular building was renowned for being very fancy on campus, and others frequently asked to go and see inside. I say sure, not wanting to be mean, and thinking this guy just wanted to take a quick look around. Maybe give the typical jealous comments and then leave. We go inside and I show him the basics, doing so in a way that we ended up back at the very entrance. This whole time he was not saying much though. I was only announcing things dryly, so I was confident when I said a quick, "So yeah, it's pretty nice. See you around." I thought he was going to take his leave right away. I turned around and went to my room. I didn't show him any rooms or say where anyone stayed. A few moments later though, as I'm setting my stuff down, I turn around and see him standing there in the doorway silently. I'm not saying anything because I didn't want to invite him in. I just wanted him to leave. I looked at him and started picking stuff up and moving it around, trying to look busy. He slowly walks into the room and asks me, "Have you done the coursework yet?" I tell him no. By this time, I assumed he was trying to hang out and told him again I was planning to take a nap. He didn't even skip a single beat though. "Well, that's okay. I want to watch you sleep. I can help you after." There was a smile, then silence again. Obviously, I told him he needed to leave immediately. I pushed him out and followed him until he actually went out the locked door, knowing he couldn't follow me back in. I told a lot of our friends about this, and they were heavily creeped out and made a point not to leave us alone again ever. We finished the year out, and I didn't think about that guy for a very long time. I didn't know anything about him at all. Still, the only thing I knew was his name. Flash forward a year and some change to the next summer though. I'm taking a bus ride home from a different part of campus, so it was not my normal route. We get to one of the points where the bus stops and waits until a certain time before it can leave again, and everyone else that had been on the bus at that moment got off at this stop. At this point, the driver started asking me a lot of questions out of nowhere. I didn't think it was that weird at first. I answered what I thought were idle chat questions. So, which apartments do you stay in? What kind of classes are you taking? As more and more questions kept coming, I started to feel uneasy with his mannerisms and became more vague in my answers. I still don't know if he always intended to tell me this, but he then stopped peppering me with all these questions. He began spilling a story of how his son was in my math class the previous year, and he knew all about me. At this point, I realized his son was the guy who wanted to watch me sleep. All the details fit, but I had to know for sure. I asked if his son was called that guy's name. He smiled and said yes. He then mentioned how he would like to start riding bikes with me. Would you like to ride bikes with me and my son? I was gathering up my stuff at this point, having decided to get off this crazy bus. There were 2 doors, one at the front and one halfway, which was the closest one to me. The doors always stay open while the bus is at these stops, so people can hop on or off when they need to. The driver will even normally get off the bus and take a break. As I'm gathering up my stuff and go to get out, the halfway doors slam shut. I look again at the driver, an older man, but much larger than my petite frame and build. He was now standing facing me. The front door was still open. He asked me again, "So, will you ride bikes with us?" I wanted off this bus, and I thought the only way out was to pacify this man. I said yes, and made my way to the front door, not knowing how to get around him. He looked pleased, but asked me where I was going. I told him I'd decided to walk home, but he blocked my way even further. He would not move no matter what I said. I'm standing in front of him, wishing to go past him, but I was just frozen in place. He was too strong. "Alright, well, give me your number and I'll let you go." I really didn't want to do this, but I also needed to get off this bus immediately. My first thought was to give a fake, but I'm glad I didn't do that, because he immediately called the number as soon as I gave it. It was a test. Seeing my phone ring and watching me save his contact, he moved just enough that I slid by and made it off the bus. After making it home, I went to block his number. I saw I already had multiple missed calls and a voicemail of just him breathing. The situation was reported, and I didn't see him on a route for a long time. Around a year later though, as I was getting on another bus, I noticed he was back. I've never covered my face and backed off a public transit faster in my life. This all took place in a 4-year time period, and I'm a girl. I started taking extracurricular drama classes when I was 12 years old. We had a small class of about 6 or so people. The eldest boy in this class was about 14. I'll call him X. I never felt comfortable around X. He was much larger than me, and he was always doing this fake Russian accent, pretending to choke people in our skits. Thus, I didn't really go out of my way to try and speak with him. He took a particular interest in me though, and would try to speak with me about almost everything he had done every time he saw me. I didn't like being around him. He was very off-putting for some reason. I would complain to my mother all the time about how I found him creepy, but she would only find it amusing and laugh at me. As the years went by and our class got larger, he would still try and talk to me quite a bit every lesson. However, things slowly got worse over time. It started when I noticed he would follow me around the room. We did these exercises where we would do different styles of walking. E.g., we would run around like our baby buggy had started rolling down the hill and things like that. Once I noticed he was always behind me, I would start doing these real crazy random patterns to try and lose him, but I could never manage it. I thought this was odd, but I also found it a bit funny. After all, I was only 13 at this point. I again complained to my mother, and she suggested he had a simple crush on me. I soon noticed he would try and sit and stand as close as possible to me. If he was already sitting down and I chose to move somewhere else, he would stand up and go right to where I was. I was starting to get really unsettled around him by this point, but I thought he would stop eventually. He only ever did small things like this, and it didn't seem too bad. Then we got to the start of last year. By this point, I'd gotten a boyfriend, though I hadn't publicly said this to my drama group, because why the fuck would I? I was 16 and X was 18. My mother had started to drop me off half an hour early because she had to get ready for work. I was fine with that, as I had time to do some reading on my own. That was before X realized I was coming in early on my own. X started to arrive even before I did. My mom's car would drive up, and I would see him just patrolling the area. I'm serious when I say this. He would just walk up and down the street waiting for my car to arrive. When he saw me, he would walk right up to the door to my drama class and hold it open, waiting for me. It filled me with dread to see him like this, but my mother brushed off my complaints as him just being nice. I would have to wait alone with X for at least another 15 minutes every week. We would sit down on this bench. I made sure I sat with the wall on one side of me and my bag on the other, so he couldn't touch me. By this point, I had grown quite afraid of him. He had developed this tendency to get very angry and had recently yelled at a group of students for not thanking him properly when he held the door open for them. One day, my greatest fears came true. He attempted to ask me out. He was all stuttery and clearly trying to ask me something, and I knew immediately what he was trying to do. I begged for anyone to arrive. Funnily enough, my boyfriend arrived, and X was interrupted. I wasn't out of the woods yet, though. Due to drama exams, we started to have 2 classes a week. I was fine with the second class, as my mother did not have work at that time, but I was still stuck seeing him. I didn't tell anyone that I thought X was trying to ask me out. I mean, that's a weird thing to just say to people, right? The following drama lesson, he did finally get the courage to ask me out, and I tried to gently reject him. I was slightly relieved because he just went silent, and another classmate soon arrived. This just made things even worse, though. He would constantly harass me in class and shove himself in between anyone I was sitting next to. When I was talking to a friend, he would just stand directly behind them, breathing on their neck and watching me, waiting for an opportunity to speak to me. I was utterly terrified. The pinnacle of this was the day of our drama exam. His exam was 2 full hours before mine, yet he was still there when I arrived for mine. Once mine was over and I went to leave, he followed right behind me. I sprinted down the road to the train station to get home, and he was following me the whole way. I don't know how long he waited for, but I hid in the girls' bathroom at the station for half an hour. I worked up the courage to tell my drama teacher, who subsequently called his horrified mother. His mother had a vague understanding of what was happening and was just about to call my drama teacher, but she didn't know the full story. X had told her we were all going out for lunch when the exams were over. She'd gotten a call from another person's mom, though, saying that we weren't. Thus, she'd parked her car near the exam to see what was going on and why he was taking so long. She saw me looking hysterical running down the road. X had already told her of my rejection. I don't know when she confronted him or what she said, but that was why he stopped following me, I guess. Our next drama class was 3 days after the exam and 2 days after I'd told my teacher. The teacher arranged an intervention between me, X, and his mother. I was pulled out of drama to talk to them. His mother apologized to me profusely and thanked me for not calling the police, as he was now an adult and could have been charged. I don't recall much of the conversation, as I was in such a state at the time that I can't really remember much, but I do remember X calling me the most beautiful girl he had ever met. Apparently, he thought he could get me to break up with my boyfriend before the end of the term. One sentence that really has stuck with me was his mom telling me that he would apologize to my parents at the parents' evening for the grievous harm he imposed upon my family. He and his mom left. I stayed as far away from him at that parents' evening as possible. I guess he did apologize to my parents, but I didn't stick around to hear that. I've not seen him since. Being a young woman in a nearly exclusively male-dominated industry, I have plenty of stories about creepers I've encountered over the years. This particular story about this one particular guy, though, is likely the worst yet. At the time, I was working for a steel pipe processing plant as a receiver. Trucks with 40-foot-long pipe would come in, and it was my job to offload them with a giant forklift. First, though, I had to collect the BOL from the driver. BOL stands for Bill of Lading, by the way. It's a shipping document that has information about what's on the load, where it's going, where it's from, etc. So I would retrieve this document from the trucker, compare the sheet to the cargo, then sign off on it if everything checked out. I would see a lot of the same drivers on a regular basis. I got a lot of joking comments about how I looked much too young to be driving a machine of that size. A few of them even asked me out, but I'm married, and most of them respected that. So, when I encountered a new driver from one of the trucking companies, it didn't really surprise me when one of the very first, if not the first thing he said to me was, "How old are you?" 23, I replied with a half-hearted chuckle. "Are you married?" "I'm engaged, so pretty much," I replied, starting to get a bit uneasy about this guy. Not wanting to make small talk or answer any more increasingly personal questions from this guy I had just met, I asked him for the document. "Anything for you, sexy girl." Excuse me? What did you just call me?" "It's really sexy to see a girl like you driving a big truck." Now, admittedly, I'm a bit of a hothead, and I need to stand up for myself in situations like this, or else I risk becoming a welcome doormat for this kind of attention. He hands me the paperwork with the trademark creepy grin, like he was getting off on the fact I was within grabbing distance from him. "Listen here, old man," I said as I snatched the paperwork out of his hand. "I don't come to work to be talked to like that. I'm here for a paycheck. Not for a date with an old fogey like you." "What? It's just a compliment. Don't be like that." "Don't fucking call me or say anything to me you wouldn't say to my coworkers. I have a fucking name. It's not fucking smart to talk to anyone like that before you know how it is." Yeah, I bet your name's Bitch." I signed off on his shit, dropped his copy in the mud, and went over to the other driver waiting in line. I took his paperwork first and made the creepy guy wait 30 minutes, offloading every other truck before I got to his. That's what you get for messing with the workers. We have a safety rule that the driver must be inside the truck while it's being offloaded, so I took this opportunity to be an even bigger asshole to him. I laid on the horn of my truck and angrily yelled, "Get back in your fucking truck, you moron!" After I offloaded him, I went to my supervisor and told him what happened. Not exactly a formal complaint, but I did make him aware of everything that transpired. I let him know the driver might complain to his superiors about how long it took me to see him. My supervisor sided with me. After all, he was a new guy and I'd worked here forever. He knew that if I lost my shit on someone, they deserved it. He knew about a few other incidents prior too, so he was very supportive. Told me to report anything else the guy did that was fucked up, and said he'd be willing to send someone else over to deal with that driver, if and when he brought another load. Anyway, I thought I made things pretty clear to the creeper at this point that he wasn't gonna bother me anymore. Nevertheless, I wasn't keen on the idea of having to walk up to his cab and get paperwork from him again. The next day, guess who shows up with a new load? I call over the radio. "My favorite driver is here. Can someone go grab his paperwork for me?" A couple of minutes go by and one of the coworkers I get along with well drives up in his smaller tow motor to approach the driver for his BOL. I wait off to the side and take an opportunity to have a smoke next to my machine. I wait for my coworker to come back with the paperwork. He comes back and of course he wants the scoop on everything that happened the day before. I guess the driver had asked why I wasn't there to get it from him. Coworker told him I was busy. Meanwhile, I was clearly having a smoke in clear view. In no hurry to offload this asshole, I told the coworker what transpired, when suddenly my coworker interrupted me. Don't look directly, but I think he's taking photos of you." Of course, my head whipped around in surprise, and sure enough, Buddy was holding his phone, pointing it at me, snapping tons of pictures, I assume. I hurried up into my machine and got on the radio for my supervisor. "Favorite driver here is taking photos of me. 10-4, I'll call security. Don't offload him. Given the nature of what we do and why we do it, there are strict security guidelines in place. Once a month, we have bomb sniffer dogs inspect the property. It's that big a deal, so even if he wasn't taking photos of me, he wasn't allowed to take pictures of anything on the property." Security showed up, and I watched as the driver handed them his phone. My coworker was there with him, and later told me the guy said he was just testing out his new phone. Bullshit, but whatever. They didn't find the photos on his phone, but he'd had a fair few minutes to delete them once he was informed security was on their way. Either way, he was barred from the property, and my supervisor reported him, and what happened the day before, to the driver's employer. I never saw him again, but the story doesn't end there. A few weeks later, another driver from the same company, a nice guy that I was good friends with, filled me in on my favorite driver. "Oh, your buddy got canned, eh? That's too bad. Gonna miss him." Yeah, he was on thin ice because the girls in the office were getting weird vibes from him, always hanging around way more than necessary. Nothing enough to fire him over though. His police check just came in though. Turns out he has sexual assaults on his record. Oh, how lovely.